Hello, and welcome to Digital Marketing This Week. It is episode number 47. We're calling this one Mobile, FOMO, and Facebook. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, shall we? Of course, brought to you by Seriously Simple Marketing over at seriouslysimplemarketing.com. And if you haven't already, I want to introduce myself to you. My name is Chris Mercer. I go by Mercer. It's analytics and optimization. I do content development for Seriously Simple Marketing. Of course, the host of Digital Marketing This Week. And again, if you see me at a conference or somewhere live, just yell out Mercer because I go by Mercer. There's always another Chris in the room, and it helps keep things straight. So before we jump into it, I did want to bring mention to those of you who are not part of our Insiders Club. You can go to seriouslysimplemarketing.com and you can sign up for that list. And you actually get an email at that point that will tell you when the live recording is actually happening so that you can go and join us live and join the chat room, which is always kind of a fun little adventure. So ask questions live as we go through the content itself, and then we answer those Q&As toward the end of the actual sort of content portion of the show. So you've got access to that too. It's part of being a benefits of an insider. Again, completely free service, just something we like to do to give back. And if you'd like to join us live, that's how you do it. It's also a great way to get some free help, which is super cool. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Again, just as a reminder, if you are here and you're joining us live, just feel free to introduce yourself in the chat room or ask any questions you like, and we'll jump toward the questions at the end of our content we cover today. So with that in mind, we are officially underway. Let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to bring up, I'm going to cover Facebook for Business. So we've got a Facebook for Business change this week that Facebook announced over the last week or so. And basically what's happening here is Facebook has added this new sort of page messaging feature to your business pages, right? To your fan pages for your business. And what this looks like, and this article sort of explains it, and there'll be a link to this in obviously the show notes when we go to publish the show. But what essentially is happening here, and I'm going to flip over to this tab because it's just a better, and there's a link to that in the article too, you'll see it. But what basically is happening is as people go through, they join the page, you might see an ad. Well, now the ad itself can have a little call to action on it. And we've had those before, right? Things that say sign up or buy now or whatever, register, or things like that. Well, now there's one that says send message. So once you enable this feature for your fan page, you can have the option to send a message. Well, this is a user being able to message the business. So somebody says, like in this case, they've got a little example of shoes, and somebody could click send message and then go, okay, hey, so what size do you have? Or hey, I'm looking for an order ID or whatever it is. And they can actually message the business directly. This is super cool because you've got another way to connect with customers. It's also could be dangerous if you don't have the infrastructure in place. So you've got to make sure that you're able to address these messages. And what Facebook recommends at this point is you're kind of being ported into Messenger, right? Something similar to Facebook Messenger, except it's between you and this person who messaged you. So this is kind of a live chat, sort of, right? Not exactly live, you're not expected to be there live, but like imagine if that's what it's sort of you treated it like, right? People could actually live chat with you when they've got a question about your ad. Kind of cool. Now again, it's Messenger, so I'm sure there's some delay with this thing, but pretty quickly you can turn this into, think about this in terms of live chat would be my guess. We've not implemented this on our own just because we don't have the infrastructure in place yet, but I think it's a cool idea. And if you've got the business infrastructure out there, if you already have live chat operators standing by, why not hook them into something like this and then do some ads and then get some conversations going around that upcoming webinar that you have or around a certain product that you're trying to pitch, or show on Facebook. So pretty cool. And the other thing is that Facebook will now be tracking this. So don't try this with the idea that you may or may not use it. Try this with like, hey, we're really going to give this a solid hit, because Facebook's tracking all of this and you get badges on your page. So as people go to the page, it'll be like, hey, this is very responsive. They will email you back. They'll get back to you. Right? And this is all about customer service. But again, I think you could totally use it for sales, just because that's what live chat's basically used for. And live chat, again, is for customer service too, but this is just another way to do that. So it's kind of new. Again, this has only been a week old or so, but give it a shot. Take a look at this, see if it's something right for you. Again, Facebook for Business, turning on direct page messaging. So we've got links to those in our show notes. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about Marketing Land's article. Now this is the mobile thing that we were talking about that we alluded to, and there's some sort of interesting, sort of disturbing trends around mobile. And this article that Marketing Land did is exceptional. So we're going to go through and just kind of give you the high level of what this was. You can go through and click plenty of details, and they've got lots of supporting articles in here as well. which is great. So if you need that sort of help, you can go through there if you want to get some more data on it. But the overall story here is that people that are, and maybe you can relate to this, I know I can, people that are using their mobile phones are by and large not using the browser. They're using apps. So 90% of the time spent on a phone is spent on an app. Okay, that kind of makes sense, right? Because all these different apps are out there, and there's, I probably have 85 apps installed on my own phone. So, you're going through and you're using the apps and you're playing your games and you're maybe checking, Tumblr or YouTube or Facebook or whatever, but you're not on the actual browser, the application itself, the browser, right? Chrome browser. So this is important because that means there's very little time being spent doing any of that. You check an email in the email app, right, which doesn't count as a browser. You maybe click on a link, which opens a browser. If somebody's, sending you an email, you open it and it goes to the browser. But again, this not where the majority of people are spending their time. They're spending it in apps. So the question begs, do you need to create an app? Should we start thinking about apps? And the answer is, again, my opinion in this case, but I think this is what the article alludes to, is the answer is probably not. And the reason is because of how those apps are being used. And again, this is something you can kind of relate. I know I can in my own experience. I have 85 different apps. I probably use 5 or 6 of them total, right? And occasionally I'll use one of the other ones. There's like an outlier, but most of it, it's not being used. So they talked about 2 trends around apps. One is that everybody, said they have an average of, I think it was like in this article, it was around 24 apps they were using total, and really they only use 5 per day. The other thing that they're saying is that social apps, YouTube, Facebook, all that sort of stuff, 51% of somebody's time on the app spend, right? So you're not going to be able to reach them anyway, unless you're going through those platforms. Now, this is important again as marketers, right? We're looking for this. So where's the silver lining here? If we can't reach them through the browser, right, and we're spending all this time making mobile-friendly versions of our web page and all this other stuff, and we're never going to, really get a chance to see them all that much because they're only spending 10% of their time on a phone when they're looking at things like that. Where can we get them? Well, we can get them at YouTube, right? We can get them on Facebook. We can then send them to a very friendly mobile page on a browser. Knowing they're not going to spend a ton of time on that is helpful. Right? So then they're not going to spend a ton of time, but right there you can start retargeting them, set little retargeting pixels, and then come back and then retarget them later for some desktop browser experience where they might spend a little more time doing some transactions. So just something of interest. I thought that was interesting. So basically, most people are spending the time using other apps, not the browser app. They're not actually browsing the web on their phone. They're using apps. Most of those apps, of the vast majority of the millions of apps that are out there, like very few are actually getting used. And even gaming's going down. So people were spending an hour a day with games, and now they're spending a half hour a day with games, and it's been like a year later, right, since the study came out. So all of a sudden you kind of go like, okay, well, they're not spending games as much. There's not as much leisure time, probably because of the in-app purchases. People buy their way into games now. That was one of the things the article had referenced. So there's lots of interesting things around this that you should take a look at and just be aware of. And again, it's not disastrous, but is mobile overblown? Certainly not. Lots of people are using mobile, but consider that 10% of your time is on average, 10% of your users are using the browser. So that says to me that they're not comfortable using the browser experience. It's not a good experience overall. They don't like using that app. They'd much rather use something else if they're on their mobile phone. So if you have them on the browser, it's even more distracted than we thought it was, because they already don't want to be using that. They already want to be going to Angry Birds or whatever the next new thing is. And actually, it's not even Angry Birds anymore. I think Rovio just canned about 650 people. So even that company's slipping down. So there's lots of interesting things going on in the app space. And what's starting to happen is this huge conglomeration where people are using apps, but they're not creating their own apps. Companies are not really creating their own apps because people aren't really using them unless it's super niche. But all the apps that are being used are like the main portals into the web, the Facebook, the YouTube, that sort of thing. Maybe you're doing Google Now, if you've got that on. So those are all portals, and however you can market to those different portals to then bring them back through retargeting or collecting leads at those stages wherever you can, that's probably going to be a little more helpful. So again, pretty interesting article just in terms of the trends, and worth checking out. Now let's talk on some marketing hints here. So again, just sort of general, some marketing stuff. Crazy A came out with a nice little article we thought we'd bring up. So Crazy A's got the 7 questions that every web user has. So what we talked about, or what they talked about here, is number 1, 7 questions they're asking. So 1, will I love the product, right? So this is at the point of purchase when they're about to say, okay, we're about to use this. Is this something I want to do? Will I love it? Okay. first and foremost. Second, am I going to miss out on something if I don't? Is there a fear of missing out, right? Now, we'll talk about FOMO here in a second, but that's what FOMO is. Am I a bad person if I don't support the product? This is going after the heartstrings, donating for charity. What was the Ice Bucket Challenge? I was so paranoid somebody was going to send me that thing because I didn't want to have to make that decision. So, and it wasn't for the idea of the charity. It's just I didn't want to pour ice over my head. But that was that fear, right? So, am I this bad person for not supporting this thing? Can I be proud of the product or service? This is where you sort of stand behind the brand itself. Are you happy being that? Apple's great with this. People totally stand behind that product, even though a lot of their products are really not as quality as when measured up. They have lots of issues, but people stand behind them because they're really part of that brand. Is there an advantage for me in buying the product? Okay, so that's kind of an obvious one, but what's the advantage? Do I get something to get ahead of the other guy, right, or the other gal? That's kind of what they're looking for. Is it new? So again, very tech savvy. So this is something brand new and shiny. So that's the whole squirrel syndrome setting out. Lots of SaaS stuff that's coming out now with marketers are very much into that. So is this something new and shiny, and can it get me ahead? So is it the next new thing in SEO, or is it the next new thing in tracking? What can I do that gives me my unfair competitive advantage, right? That's what that is. And then finally, can I trust you? That's the whole credibility aspect to this. Are they able to actually trust your product or service? Are they able to trust what you say? And do you fulfill what it is that what you say you fulfill? And a lot of that is obviously in customer testimonials and things along those lines, but it's also in, when you say you're going to send a confirmation email, do you? And when they confirm on the email, is it what they expect, or do they get a sales pitch? And I'm not talking about sort of the tripwire type funnel thing where people are clicking on an email and they are to confirm their email, then they go to something that eventually offers a sales pitch. But does it start at least with congruency of, okay, great, we've got you on the list, you're set, you're going to get this, this, and this, but while I have you, let me ask you about this. Like, that's totally congruent, it makes sense. But just to slam into a sales pitch without verifying that, yes, you actually confirmed your email, kind of feels like a trick, right? So it's not so much what you're doing, it's how you do it that can actually demonstrate that credibility. And should they trust you? Should they continue through that process because of that? So again, that was a really great blog post. Highly recommend you going through it to get some of the details. And it is on the Daily Egg, which is Crazy Egg's blog. Finally, actually not quite finally, we've got one more after this, but it's Google Analytics. Now this one we're excited about because we're all about analytics and conversion and split testing and optimization. That's kind of what we do. So this was pretty interesting. So real-time data validation with Google Tag, what they call assistant recordings. So this is for those of you who are using Tag Manager and you're trying to do debug, right? And again, I'm going to leave up because I know that the majority of you are kind of like, what's a Tag Manager? But for some of you, this is awesome. So, and it is for us. So when you go through and you're using Tag Manager, there's this thing called a debug mode where you can sort of debug things, and you go from page to page to page, and it sort of shows you what works and what didn't on each page. But there really hasn't been a way, other than maybe using the GA debug tool and preserving the log on that, to kind of see what's happening, right, with on the analytics end. But you miss all the tags because Tag Manager's never really had that. Well, essentially what this is doing, and I'm just going to scroll down here. Once you go through it, and it will actually send you click the little record button. This is an animated GIF, so I apologize, not me playing this video, but this is an animated GIF. But what'll happen is you hit the record button on the new Tag Manager or Tag Assistant tool here, and you go through it. It'll actually record the session and track everything. So you now sort of do have a log of what's going on with Tag Manager. So super cool tool for diagnosing for those of you who are using Tag Manager, trying to figure out what's going on with your funnels or why certain things aren't working. This is the one you want to take a look at. So the Google Analytics blog has the links to all of that. And finally, let's talk about Unbound. Unbound comes out with some great content, and we wanted to feature one of those as well. And this is, again, just in the past week or so. Clicks are people. So 3 tactics for creating more human-centered marketing. And this is where we talked about this FOMO concept. So the fear of missing out, the what's in it for me, that sort of stuff. So you can do all this sort of emotional connections with all of this, but with this particular post, it's talking about, okay, remember you're talking to a person. You're not talking to a metric. And when we get tied up with analytics and Tag Manager and conversions, and we have a tendency to do this, right? We look at everything in terms of clicks. We look at everything in terms of a conversion or a number or a result, but we forget there are people on the other side. And that's what this was actually speaking to in terms of Unbound. Again, Unbound is a great conversions agency. They do a ton of work. They've got great lead generation pages that people are using. And so that's what they're sort of the whole point of this is, right? It's getting used to realizing that when you build these pages out, it's not just a click, it's a person. And the goal is to connect to the person. And if you do that, then conversions go up. So first thing, little tip here was developing a brand strategy guide to campaigns is just sort of best practices. You don't have to overly complicate this, especially if you're just starting out and you're small. You know, your brand strategy could be like, hey, we're developing our brand strategy. We're just starting out, right? As you grow, your brand grows out of what you learn from your market and how you iterate. I've always found that to be the case. Very few people start off with like, here's what our brand's going to be. And even if they do, they always change it. It's always changed. McDonald's has changed the logo over and over again. That's a huge brand, but they changed the logo. Google just recently changed the logo. That's a massive brand, probably one of the biggest brands on the planet. And yet they just changed their logo, right? So don't get caught up in like making the right thing and kind of doing it that way. It's more like what the process of your business is. How do you do things? What do you do? What type of people do you work with? What type of people do you not work with? What type of people do you hire or not hire? What type of customers do you accept or not accept? That's sort of what that's all about. Next up, optimizing for search engines and people, very important. So making sure you have keyword phrases in your articles. You want to make sure it's in the H1 tag, which is like the title tag in WordPress, or the first, also the first 100 words, the last 100 words, and maybe 1 or 2 times in a very long article. You'd want to have those keywords, but you don't overly write it so you're writing for a robot, because a lot of people can do that. They overly optimize and it just doesn't feel right. And we've all seen these articles. Fortunately, Google's done a really good job of getting rid of these, but there is not that, and you'll still come across them, but not too far in the distant past. There were lots of times where you go to try to find something and you land on this sort of junky, low quality article that was just written by somebody that was just, and a lot of times actually it was a spinner. It's what they call an article spinner, where people are putting in decent articles and then the algorithm spins out, replaces out adjectives and spins out 45 different variations of the same article so they can publish it everywhere on their 45 different sites. And so they're basically able to cast a wider net, and that worked for a very long time. But they were writing for the machine. It was just, hey, keep the keyword phrase in there, and if it doesn't quite make sense to a human, well, they'll get enough value out of it where we just at least get the click and the eyeballs, and then we'll raise in the search engine rankings, and then we'll go from there, right? And that worked for a while. But at the end of the day, if you're going to build a real company and you're not going to keep building your company on tricks, which is going to be quicksand, right? If you don't enjoy that count and mass game, and I don't, I enjoy just sort of like building a business. Let's build a business for the long term and make sure it's stable. And that's the whole game of business, is to make sure that you're in business tomorrow. That's it, right? Ultimately, yes, it's profit, but at the end of the day, if you're making sure that today you're in business tomorrow, profit happens, right? That's the goal. Because if you can't be in business tomorrow, it's because you didn't make a profit, right? So the goal is to continue to be in business. And I'm not a big believer in the cat and mouse stuff of trying to figure out the loopholes and then figure out the next loophole and the next loophole. But with search engines and people here, when you're writing to a person, and you keep in mind, you need to keep the keyword phrase in there because the robot's on the side trying to figure it out. And so let's make it a little easier for them. Make sure we're using title tags, all that sort of stuff. But again, connect with your audience. And then finally, they talk about segmentation and personalization. Now, there are lots of ways that you can do this. So a very simple example is putting the person's first name in an email subject, right? Or just where it says, hey, first name, and do a merge field in your email. You can do lots of that. There are lots of WordPress plugins that are doing a lot of dynamic insertion too. So you could pass through a person's name, and there's actually free plugins that do this, where you can pass through a person's name in the email as a parameter, right? Just call it, name equals, and then do a little merge field where it would be at, www.example.com/first name equals Bob. And then there's a plugin on again, WordPress, where you can tell it, okay, I want to see wherever there's first name, I want you to grab that value and just remember it. And when I need it, I want to be able to place it into my code. And it's very simple to operate, and it does exactly that. So it goes and says, oh, okay, first name equals Bob. And then when it loads up the landing page in your copy, you say insert short code here. For those of you who use WordPress, you'll know what I mean, but a little short code that you enter. And it basically says, put the value here of whatever first name was. And so now when Bob comes to the first name or to that page, that lander page, it says, welcome, Bob, here's blah, 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 right? Or, and it's personalized, very simple to do. And it does set you apart because not a lot of people are doing that. And there's not a ton of creep factor as long as you have a relationship with the individual. Now, if I just clicked to come across their ad, maybe on a search engine result or something like that, and then it came and said, hey, Chris, how you doing? Like, that's weird, right? That's weird, especially because nobody calls me Chris. But that would be weird. I didn't give it permission to. But if I opt in for a company's email, and typically I'll, first name Mercer, and so I'll put in Mercer, I'll put in my email address, and then if I clicked on one of their emails and it comes to a page that says, hey, thanks for clicking Mercer, here's what we've got for you now, totally cool. I'm part of the conversation. I've given them permission to be part of the conversation. And so that segmentation and that personalization is amazing. Now, going back to the segmentation aspect, if you're using a tool like Infusionsoft, segmentation is super easy. So Infusionsoft is just sort of built for this. It's what we use. But you can go through and you can tag. So basically, even based on emails, like if we send an email out to you and we say, hey, here's this great new WordPress plugin that we found that enables you to take parameters out of the URL so you can personalize your landing pages. And it's totally free and it's awesome. Click here to check it out. And as soon as you click on that link, it takes you off to that WordPress plugin. But meanwhile, Infusionsoft on our end, we tagged you as being interested in WordPress plugins. And we know that you use WordPress now, right? We tag you as using WordPress. So now we can have a completely separate conversation with everybody whose tag contains WordPress. And we know that we're talking to somebody who uses WordPress, because there's a lot of people who don't, right? A lot of people do, most people do, but there's some people who don't. And so why would we want to have a conversation about this new WordPress thing that we have when the people that are open the email may or may not be using WordPress? Much better for us to segment and say, hey, we're going to send this just to people who like opening stuff about WordPress plugins, because there's this brand new plugin, you got to check it out. Same thing on the analytics and tracking end. If we know that you're into analytics and tracking, we're going to send you conversations about that, right? And we're not going to send you conversations about, graphic design using Photoshop, because maybe that's not your thing. And so that's what's really cool about the segmentation. It is not that hard to do. It sounds complicated. It sounds like there's a lot of work. But when you're using tools like Infusionsoft, these things automate everything, right? These plugins, they automate everything. Yes, it takes a little while to get it set up, but it's entirely worth it. Absolutely, absolutely worth it. So again, go through this Unbound article. We recommend you taking a look at it. That's where we got all these ideas. And the things that we do with digital marketing this week, this is it. Like, we're going through these articles. We find something that's recent, obviously, in the last week or so. We want to bring it to your attention, let you know that it's out there. And then at the same time, we can sort of riff off of it a little bit and say, here's how we're interpreting this. Here's how we're using this article. Because all of these articles, you don't just read them to read them. You read them and sort of go, okay, how can I use this? And so hopefully with this episode, you're able to kind of get an idea of how you can use these different things and why it's important to stay in touch with it. And again, if you don't have the time, that's why we are here. So you can use us each week to kind of get you caught up on some of the goings on with digital marketing. So with that, we were going to go ahead and bring it to an end.